Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Hope you're having a great day. In this video, I'm going to play a recording that was made during a talk or seminar that I gave on bird photography tips and tricks. This was recorded a couple weeks ago at the Treasure Coast Photography Group's monthly meeting, the first in-person meeting they had since COVID basically shut us all down over a year ago. And I was really honored that they asked me to be their first live speaker since the COVID shutdown. And they were nice enough to record it for me. I think that it contains some things that might help some people with their bird photography. So I thought I'd go ahead and replay it in this video. I'll put some chapters in there so you all can skip around if you'd like. But my goal again is just to provide some information that might help a few people with their bird photography. So if you're interested in learning some of my tips and tricks, stay tuned. Thank you all for inviting me here tonight as your first speaker since how long? Over a year now, dealing with COVID and all that kind of stuff. So I'm very honored to be here. I'll try to keep this, like Tom said, general. I shoot Canon, but I did shoot Sony for a couple years. Dabbled in other makes and models and all that kind of stuff. But this isn't about cameras. As far as Canon versus Nikon versus Sony, it's about photography, and it's about what I do. Basically, that's all I do is birds, and I specialize in birds in flight photography. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Wisconsin. My dad started getting me up at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was 3.5 years old. My mom just hated that, got so mad at him for doing that, but I'm glad he did, because he started me birding and stuff when I was just a little kid. And it stimulated something in me about birds. How many of you just love birds? I mean, who doesn't love birds or really find them fascinating? I mean, they're such unbelievable creatures. So since I've been about 3.5, 4 years old, I've just been fascinated with birds, and I do a lot of bird photography. That's one job that I do. And for those of you who don't know, I also work for Florida Fish and Wildlife as an avian research biologist, and I've done that for over 30 years. So birds have been in my life basically since I was a little kid. And what really got me into photography in birds was I'm a bird conservation biologist, and I work with data every day, right? Data, graphs, and things like that. You're trying to convince people with a lot of money, right? Those are the ones you really want to convince to help you in your conservation effort. Well, the problem with data is it's cold. It's a cold thing. Numbers just don't stir emotions. But great pictures of birds, especially the birds that you're trying to conserve and stuff like that, that stirs people's emotions. So that, I started pairing great photography with graphs and stuff of the data. People look at the data if they also have something there that really piques their interest. So that's how you can kind of meld the two things that I do, right? But enough of, so I moved to Florida about 30 years ago, not quite 30 years. And birds in Florida, right? What can you say? Throughout the entire year, there's an amazing assortment of birds here, and some of them are very unique. We already heard about the snail kite. It doesn't occur anywhere else in North America except here in Florida. It does occur in South America and Central America and stuff like that. But anyway, you couldn't be in a better place if you're going to be stuck in one spot in the United States for bird photography. You can do a lot worse than Florida. So anyway, so like I said, Florida, there we go. So Florida, all that stuff is basically around here. The burrowing owls, swallowtail kites, the snail kites, all that kind of stuff. So what I want to talk about though is some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years to do bird photography. Every type of photography has its idiosyncrasy. That's what's so great about photography. What you were just looking at with the doll stuff, it couldn't be anything further from this, right? I mean, it's about as far away as bird photography as you can get, but it's all really interesting, and it's all about capturing light in a really dynamic way, dynamic subjects, whether it be that lady that was dressed up like that, or these birds, right? And so the first tip that I want to give to you all, I get asked this a lot, and it's what makes a great wildlife image? What makes a great bird image in this case? To me, I'm always out, and what I'm thinking about, and I try to impress upon the people I talk to, is tell a story with the image. Take a picture of a bird on a stick. If it's the bird you've never seen, or you want a pretty picture of a bird on a stick, great, and that's fine. And those images can be awesome. But if you look at the images that generally win competitions or whatever, or stir emotions, like I said earlier, they tell a story in a still image. That videos come on strong in the last 10 years, a decade. And we're going on here, we got iPhones and everything going on here with great video, and it's motion and there's sound and all that kind of stuff. Maybe a little bit easier to tell a story with video, but if you can tell a story with one instant in time that you've captured, that's something. That's why still photography is never going away. Some people say video is going to kill still photography and stuff like that. Not in my mind, okay? And this is why, these are just two images, but you know, that's an owlet, that's a burrowing owlet over there. And he's got, it's his personality. If you've ever been around burrowing owls at all, and if you go over to Cape Coral or even on the East Coast down here, there's burrowing owls that are easily accessible and you can photograph them. But if you've ever watched them, they're clowns. They're so animated, and that's what makes them so interesting to people, and that's why people love them and want to conserve them. But you capture an image, you try to capture that clown kind of mentality that these birds seem to have, right? You got ospreys around here. We got tons of ospreys. Like Blue Cypress is a great place to go for them. We got 100 nesting pairs out there, so that's 200 birds in a very small area. That's where this image was taken of the osprey, but it's doing something a little bit different there. It's not just perched on a stick with a fish. Ospreys eat fish 99% of the time. It's a great shot, but this is how they clean their talons and clean themselves a lot of times. Once they got all that fish guts all over them and stuff like that, they get out and they skim the water like that. They drag their talons. This one actually did a little bit more than that. Took a drink. It's got its head buried in the water, right? So again, telling a story about its behavior, how it lives its life, a small instance of how it lives its life, right? So that's what I like to start out with a lot of times on these talks is, what my mentality is, because that's a big part of photography, is going out and would there be someone that would be willing to change the slides for me as we go so I don't have to keep going back there? Would someone be willing to do that? I would really appreciate it. I usually have a presenter that does it, but it wasn't working when I was testing it out the other day, so that would be great. So, let's just enter. Just enter would be fine. Thank you so much. So anyway, start out at the very beginning here. Your equipment, standard equipment. Digital SLRs, which is what most of us have been using for a long, long time now. Anybody still shoot film? No film. You know what? I usually at least have one person in a crowd this size that still shoots film from time to time. I don't anymore either. Digital SLRs kind of took that over, right? Well, now we're having another paradigm shift going on right in front of our eyes right now. And that's the switch to mirrorless camera bodies, right? Digital SLRs have a mirror, you look through the lens. You look through the viewfinder, optical viewfinders. Mirrorless cameras like the Canon R5, again, this isn't about Canon or anything else, but it's what I shoot, is a mirrorless camera. So now, instead of looking through the lens, you actually have a little TV that you're looking at, and no mirror. So it can be perfectly silent. Lots of other things to talk about as far as mirrorless versus digital SLRs, but the point is, you generally need one or the other these days to do good bird photography. Okay, going out there with your iPhone or your iPad, Tough, right? Tough. You know, probably wouldn't recommend it. So just really quick, you know, digital SLR or mirrorless. Super telephoto lenses. You take a look at this picture. This is my boat. Okay, this is out at the rookery at Fellsmere, the Stick Marsh. If you've ever driven out there, you can get some really good pictures. There's a rookery, spoonbills, all that kind of stuff out there. The wadybird types. Accessible from even here on the land, but I take my boat out there so we can get some different angles and stuff like that. But do you see anybody in that boat pointing anything like a 50mm lens? No, right? They're pointing mostly this kind of stuff now, the zooms. This is a 100 to 500, okay? So that's generally what we're talking about here. For birds, birds are tough to get close to. They're generally pretty small. Okay, that woman that was all dressed up as the doll and stuff, she's pretty big. She ain't going anywhere when you go, she's doing everything you want. The lights
She
good,
wasn't
all
scared
that.
of the sound of a shutter going on.
Yeah, right.
They were going up and down.
Yes, exactly. The birds, they don't like you getting close a lot of times, and they're small and stuff. So we need focal length. 500mm, 600mm, 840mm, 1200mm. Okay, that's not out of the realm of reason for birds. Okay, so P stands for prime lens, Z for zoom. Okay, so I have one of each here. That's my 600 f4 prime, 100 to 500 zoom. Zooms are great. Flexibility, right? 100 to 500, you put a 1.4 times teleconverter on there, you go up to 700mm. Bird starts flying right at you, you can pull back. You ain't pulling back with that unless you step backwards, and when you're in that situation, you want to step backwards. Because you're going to get really wet, and all that money's going to be the anchor for that boat, and you don't want that, right? But the reason I bring this up is that that's a lens I bought many years ago now and spent a lot of money on. It's 600f4. But the reason why myself and a lot of other people that do bird photography, not just professionals like myself, but avid enthusiasts like you all, will spend that kind of money is because you had to, many times, to get the image quality that you're really looking for, right? Zooms just didn't cut it in the past. You sacrificed image quality because moving parts in there and stuff, they just couldn't line up just right or anything. Nowadays, that's not the case. With the modern manufacturing technology that's out there, these lenses, this 100 and 500, I'm getting images that are just as sharp, just as contrasty, just as awesome as that lens would produce. Okay, so you've got situations now where you can use zooms where you really almost had to buy these really expensive primes in the past. So don't think you have to shoot these and buy these big, awesome, and awesomely expensive primes, because you don't have to. How do you shoot birds? Well, all this video going on back here is all on tripods, right? You know how often I use a tripod to shoot birds? Whether it's static or in flight? Like almost never, except when you absolutely have to. The kingfisher pictures that were in that video, that's from a blind. And anybody know kingfishers at all? Have you ever tried to get close to build a kingfisher? Like a quarter mile away, it says, I'm out of here. Right? Well, we're in blinds when we shoot that. And that bird is from me to you. Okay, we're that close. But it does not tolerate, even in a blind, you can't be lifting your camera, pointing it out, bringing it down, pointing it up, and gone, right? On a tripod, lens sticking out of the hide at all times. Otherwise, they won't tolerate it. So sometimes, yes, you need to use a tripod or a monopod, but most of the time, it's your arms, right? It's your arms. That's where these kinds of things really start being really friendly to you. Super light, super heavy, right? So again, you don't have to think that, well, I can't do birds or birds in flight or anything like that because you have to handhold all the time, and I just can't do that because the stuff, these big long lenses are just too heavy. Well, that used to be kind of the case. It's not so much the case anymore. Who shot Olympus? Who shoots Olympus Micro Four Thirds, right? Small, light, compact, easily handheld, but yet 500, 600mm in what? A package this long, right? And light. There's some drawbacks to Micro Four Thirds versus these, which are full frame, okay, and stuff like that. We're not going to get into that kind of detail tonight, but you can do it, okay? And so many people say, I can't handhold. I can't handhold long focal lengths. It's too heavy. Yes, you can. And I'm going to show you a little trick here. I'm not going to put it on because sometimes it takes a while. This is a harness that goes with both shoulders, and it has a little pouch right here, okay? It's a military parade flagpole harness. So the flag holders in the front of the parade, right? That's where the flagpole goes, so they can hold it forever. Well, you can do the same thing with this heavy thing in a monopod, okay? And you put this in the monopod in here, and all the weight goes onto your shoulders. You can literally shoot this thing right here, which is about 11 pounds, with 2 fingers. All of the weight is on your shoulders, okay? There's a head on here called a mono gimbal head that's made by Wingolin. You can come up and take a look at it if you want to. It's small and light, and it's kind of a critical part of this because this is a gimbal head. Gimbal heads. What does a gimbal head do? It allows you to balance all that weight, right? So when you let go of the camera, it doesn't flop forward or flop backward like a ball head would. So you can actually balance that, put this on, put it in there, and you can walk around all day and basically shoot 2 fingers, something that weighs 11 pounds. So if you want to do that, and even on something like this, if you have to hold it up and hold it up and hold it up, it allows people that may have a handicap, bad shoulder, I have a bad left shoulder right now, stuff like that, especially for video. It allows certain people that just still couldn't hold things up because they just can't physically do it. My point is, there's ways to do it if you want to do it. Okay, and hand holding for birds, especially birds in flight, gets you the flexibility that you need because you never know where they're going to come from or where they're going to go. And if you're sitting on a tripod facing this way and it's happening over here and you're on my boat, right? Well, it's gone. But anyway, you can't turn. You just can't. It's not possible. But if you have hand holding, right, you just turn. So hand holding can be a key to doing this sometimes. Hit the button there. I think we moved forward beyond. Can we go back? Hit backspace. There we go. All right, we're good. Next. One more. Okay. Setting your exposure, right, for birds and birds in flight, and how you deal with your exposure and the modes that you shoot in. How many of you shoot a lot in like aperture priority, shutter priority, some kind of priority? Okay, I don't. I shoot strictly manual. Okay, and there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But
I know John's happy about it.
no matter what mode you shoot in, you have to get kind of your initial exposure set for whatever light is out there when you get there, whatever conditions you're shooting in, whether it's out in Florida like this, where we generally have really good light, or if you're in Costa Rica in the middle of a rainforest or something like that, right? You have to set your initial exposure, but this is subject photography. Birds are subjects, and the only thing that matters, and that's the point I want to make here, is that you get the exposure on the bird correct, for whatever light you're in. I don't care about the background. I don't care about the foreground. If I have to blow out the background to get my bird right, if I have to block up the background to get my bird right, that's what you gotta do, okay? I get so many people going, well, if your bird's dark, and you go, yeah, but otherwise the sky would have been blown out. Look at the sky, it's nice and perfect blue. Oh yeah, great sky. But the bird's black, and it's not a black bird, okay? So it's like, this is subject photography, so you have to learn how to set your initial exposure when you get out there. And with mirrorless cameras now, okay, one of the cool things is that you're not looking through your lens anymore like a digital SLR. When you look through your lens with a digital SLR, whatever setting you have for your exposure, you're still seeing the ambient lighting conditions through your lens. Not with a mirrorless camera, okay? You can actually see your exposure now looking at your viewfinder through the camera. So now, setting your initial exposure becomes super simple. I don't care if you shoot priority of some sort, or manual, or anything else, you can do it by looking through the viewfinder. With the digital SLR, well, it's still not film days, right? You take a picture, you turn it on, and you look. Well, that's too dark. But the point is, you're trying to set your exposure for the bird in the light you want it in. Okay, you're expecting it here, the light's behind me, I want it here. I'm not setting my exposure for over here, I'm setting it for in the realm that I really want. Okay? And so pick something, and let's say we're shooting white birds, egrets and things like that. Pick something bright, that's there, maybe the birds aren't there now, set your exposure in the light ahead of time. And I don't care if you're using exposure compensation with a priority mode or manual focus. The reason why I like manual, right? Because once you set it, it's set. And we'll talk again a little bit about that, more about that in a minute. But setting your initial exposure for your subject, okay, in the light you want it in. If the light's right behind me, and I set my exposure here, once you go over here, when you go over here, light's starting to fall off by almost a stop or more, depending. Up here, could be 2 stops. Could be bright sun. This is 2 stops darker up here. You got an osprey coming right at you. It's perfect now. You get up here, 2 stops darker. Okay, so that's why it's important to kind of restrict your attention to the place that you want for the type of image you want. You ignore all this other stuff. Okay, next. Checking your exposure, I just talked about that, so we can go on to the next one. The click method. These dials, these things are computers now. We're holding computers. And they all have a bunch of dials on it. I don't care if it's Canon or Nikon or Sony. You got one here, you got one here, you got one on your thumb. I hate this thing. And you got one on your thumb that you call a thumb wheel. They all click, they all click. And in every menu of every camera I've ever known, pretty much recently, is you can set what one of those clicks means. A third of a stop. One way or the other, plus or minus, is each click. So that's how I kind of work things. You can talk about stops and things like that, but people get freaked out when you start using photography language a lot of times. Like, what's a stop? A stop is just a unit of measurement. That's all it is. There's nothing magical about what a stop is. But when you start talking about clicks, and clicks of a wheel, people kind of, oh yeah, I can get that. So if you want to change your exposure or set your exposure, and one of those wheels sets your aperture and one sets your shutter speed, you go one direction, one click. To make the same exposure, you go one click on the other parameter the other direction. And you keep things balanced. So you just think about clicks rather than stops or thirds of a stop or whatever you have your menu set to, because it can be a third or a half. I like fineness, right? A third of a stop, that's where I have mine set. So the click method is just counting clicks instead of worrying about stops and all this kind of stuff. To get your exposure right and to keep it, but maybe change the dynamic of your image. More depth of field, you're gonna stop down, right? You're gonna close up your aperture. Closing up your aperture is gonna make it darker. So now I gotta go the opposite direction with my shutter speed, make it slower to compensate. Same number of clicks on each one will get you there. Keep your same exposure if it's right, but get you a different dynamic of your image. That's the click method. Have and double method. Birds in flight. Birds in general, very mobile, unless you're talking about something like a kiwi or something that doesn't fly, right? But most birds fly and they're very mobile. They can appear in an instant. 1 minute, we're talking about shooting a heron, a white heron, great egret, snow egret, whatever. Really bright bird. You've got your initial exposure set for whatever you were shooting. But not all birds are the same color, same luminosity in that light that you set it for. When a bird starts flying at you, that's a different luminosity than your white bird. Let's say it's a black bird. You don't have minutes to figure out a new exposure for that bird. You have seconds, if that. So I have something I call the have and double method. So if you're shooting a white bird and you're at 1/4000th of a second, it's a bright day, bright morning, and you're shooting really fast shutter speeds because you're shooting a white heron that's flying around and doing a lot of cool stuff, and you're 1/4000th of a second, here comes a snail kite, a male snail kite, dark, much darker. I don't have time to think about what the heck to do. Just have your shutter speed. If you're at 1/4000th of a second, that dial up front there that I was right by my shutter button, that's my shutter speed. Zip down to 1/2000th of a second and start shooting. Is it going to be perfect? No, but you're going to be within the realm of reason on your exposure, to where if you're shooting RAW and not JPEG, and sometimes even if you're shooting JPEG, you're going to be really close to the right exposure. If you're on the other end and you're shooting dark and something bright comes, you double the shutter speed, right? That's the have and double method. You don't have to think so much. 1/4000th of a second, zoop, 1/2000th of a second. Well, what happens if I'm at 1/1000th of a second and I have to have it? Well, go ahead. But you know what? Sometimes there's just not enough light to do what you want. I get people all the time, clients saying, we're out doing snail kites and the sun's not up yet and the snail kites are all around us and they're freaking out because they can't shoot light. Yeah, that's photography. It's about light, right? Sometimes you just can't do what you want to do. It's when you want to do it. Sometimes you got to wait. Sometimes those conditions will never materialize. But again, this is just a general thing, and if it gives you the chance to do it, it works, and it works quickly, and it'll get you some shots you might miss. Okay, otherwise, thinking too much, taking too much time to think with wildlife photography in general, birds especially, I think, a lot of times they don't care. They're just doing they're going about their life. They don't care about you getting a picture of them. If you want that shot, sometimes you got to be able to be quick. That's this, hand holding, all that kind of stuff. Lean and mean kind of photography birds a lot of times. The burst method. Okay, we talked about, well, what if I have to have my shutter speed down to 1/500th of a second on that snail kite flying by? You know what? If you have other things set correctly, you might still be able to get a good flight shot even at 1/500th of a second, especially if you shoot 20 frames per second. Okay? Not too long ago, 5 frames per second, 6, 8, that was a lot. R5, 20 frames per second electronic shutter. That's the burst method. You've got the ability to shoot bursts of images. And so when that snail kite's coming by and you know you're at 1/500th of a second, you're going to concentrate, you're going to pan really as good as you can with that bird, because that's important, but you're not going to be shooting one shot, click, click as it goes by, right? You're on 20 frames per second, 12 frames per second, whatever the maximum frame rate your camera can shoot, and that's important for bird photography. That's why a lot of action, it's action photography. You need a camera that can produce some frames per second, okay? That bird comes by, you rip off 20 frames per second as it goes by, you get 200 images in just that amount of time, right there. The point is, you shot a burst. Are they all going to be sharp? No. Maybe one will be. It was the split second when you were panning perfectly with the bird's wings were up, completely stopped, or down, completely stopped. You can pull out that image when you shoot really fast frames per second. It's just a probability thing, it's statistics. Shooting 5 frames per second, you might not get any, hardly ever. 20 frames per second, 30 frames per second, you're gonna pull out that one shot, 2 shots maybe. If you get really good at panning, maybe 20. But that's important. That's the burst method. You shoot bursts with birds most of the time. You're not out there going, get on the bird, click. You know, that's not bird photography in general. Even perched birds, okay? Because remember, you're hand holding long focal lengths. The bird's small. You know, you're not always in the most, you're not sitting in your car, you know, nice and comfortable. You may be stretched out in pain from a cramp in your leg. Bursts at high shutter speeds most of the time when you can do it, okay? Fast shutter speeds, right? Long lenses. That's a hallmark of bird photography, not just birds in flight. Perch birds. Again, anybody shoot warblers?
Yeah.
Right? How long do they sit in one branch? How many? I don't even think it's a second most of the time. You get certain species, they don't even sit there for a whole second, right? So that's a different kind of action. It's like, again, you're just burst, and you hope to get one where he's, or she is, well, mostly the he's, because we want the colors, right? But anyway. Anyway, you know, so again, the burst thing comes into play. It's not just with birds in flight or with quick action when the birds are flying. It can be all sorts of things can put you into a need to shoot burst and fast shutter speeds, because the fast shutter speed is your friend. It will compensate. It will give you that fudge factor for all sorts of movements you're making and that the bird's making. If you can shoot flash does the same thing. Sync speeds on flash, what, max? Well, that may change, but like what, 1/250th of a second or something like that? 1/320th sometimes now on some of these cameras. But again, well, why can you stop action at such slow shutter speed? Well, it's the strobe now. It's a completely different thing. It's all about the physics of light. But we're not out there shooting 20 frames per second with a flash. It ain't working. So fast shutter speeds are our friend. They do kind of what a flash can do for you in other scenarios. Handhold or monopod, I've already talked about that. I prefer monopods if you need some sort of stabilization to tripods, because it's, again, even if you're not using a harness system like this, it's so much easier to move around with a monopod, pick it up, move and stuff like that. 3 legs just is like, holy cow, you know? Especially on my boat. I mean, you have 4 people lined up along the one wall of the boat, all with tripods. Whoa, I won't go into those stories either. But anyway, hand holding and monopods are really the way to go. Birds, a lot of birds are flocking type birds. And like ducks especially are flocking. You have multiple birds a lot of times. Some people have a hard time when they have multiple, like a flock of birds coming by. They do what I call flock shooting, you know. They just point in the middle of the flock and just start shooting and hoping they autofocus grabs something in there. Well, pick a bird, you know, pick one bird. Usually it's the lead bird in a flock if you're shooting ducks or something like that. In this case it wasn't though, it was the middle long-tailed duck there that I was aiming for. So it's generally just a good rule and a good tip to pick a subject, pick a bird out of the flock. You'll do better that way many, many times rather than just trying to hope that the autofocus grabs some bird out of the flock that's flying or whatever it's doing. On the water, it's the same thing. Pick a bird. Right? Don't let the numbers kind of get you. So another way to go, though, especially on birds that are sitting or floating on the water or whatever, if you have multiple birds, when you're shooting high focal lengths, long focal lengths like this, anybody know, like, my 600 has a 1.4 attached to it right now, so that's 840 millimeters. So even if I'm at, let's say, at 5.6, you know how deep my depth of field is?
200 of an inch.
Kind of like that. It's about that much, all right? And you could go to F22 or you could go as high as you can go. And when you do that, when you stop down like that, you're not going from this to there to there. You're going from this to this, maybe. Okay, that's all you're gaining. So you really can't gain a lot when you're shooting birds with long focal lengths like this by stopping down, by closing down your aperture. It just isn't going to give you a whole lot to work with. But we all know that depth of field extends from your point of focus, right? Your plane of focus, both behind and in front. So many people that I've seen, their images, they have multiple birds and they're stacked. I call them stacked. They're not all in the same plane of focus. They're one behind the other, staggered. They focus on the front. They want them all in focus. That's their goal. They focus on the front bird. Well, why would you do that? If your goal is to get all the birds, because you wasted all that depth of field that's out front. Midway focus. Focus on the middle bird. Now you've got depth of field working for you here and here. Will you have enough depth of field to get everything totally sharp? Probably not, depending on how far they're stacked or staggered. But at least the back bird and the front bird then might be close enough to where you can use some magic like topaz and sharpen, right? And get them to where you kind of want them. But if you focus on the front bird or the back bird, you're just wasting part of your depth of field. And that depth of field is precious when you're shooting focal lengths like this. How many of you love the autofocus systems on these cameras now? How many of you are shooting mirrorless now? Sony, Canon R5, Sony A1, Sony A9 II. Tracking these zone autofocus methods now, and on the Canon R5, the eye detect with tracking is amazing. It is amazing. But I'm getting a lot of people that are having very, very grave problems. To them, it's like it's going to put them in the grave. They spent all this money, they hear all this stuff on my YouTube channel, that this is so awesome, and then they buy it and they go out and they're struggling, okay? I'm going to use pre-focusing as an example. These are still just machines. These are computers. Work toward their strengths. Help the system out. Don't work against it, okay? These autofocus systems are amazing at grabbing things and holding on to them. Birds in flight, birds bopping around in a bush, a warbler or something like that, but it's not perfect. It's not God inside that thing, okay? It's a machine, it's a computer. One of the ways that you can really help yourself out is to pre-focus If the action's gonna happen out here, like we said, we set our exposure for out there and everything else, we want our bird right here. I'm pre-focusing there ahead of time, so that when that bird comes to where I want it, and believe me, a lot of times it does come to where I want it, I've made it easy for my autofocus system on my camera now, because it's flying right into focus, all by itself. Because it's coming right to that stick, right where I want it, I pre-focused there. So now when it's flying in and I hit the autofocus, you know, I use back button, but half press, whatever you use to initiate autofocus, if you're already 9/10 of the way there and you hit that button, bam, it's got it. With the technology in these autofocus systems nowadays, you do that, you help that autofocus system out like that, and not only that, you put it in the center of the frame, because all of these systems are center weighted. They're looking for things near the center of the frame first. Can they grab things at the periphery? Yes, but a lot less often. Pre-focus and put that bird in the center of the frame and then hit that autofocus. 99% of the time nowadays with this technology, it's got it. And once it's got it, it's not going to let go if you have some of the other settings set your camera correctly. So I'm using pre-focus here as an example of help your system out, even as good as they are, for birds in flight. How many of you, what's the hardest genre of photography? I mean, what's the most difficult genre?
Birds in flight.
I'm biased, but I'll tell you what, landscapes, that damn mountain ain't going anywhere. Okay, yeah, you gotta know, you have to have an eye, right? Composition is super important in all of these genres, all of them, especially in landscape and architecture and even portraiture, okay? But I'm telling you, there's nothing harder than shooting a tree swallow in flight grabbing midges, okay? And getting, I'm not talking about way over there, I'm talking about right here and getting it big in the frame. There's nothing harder than that. You gotta help these systems out, and if you do it, they're really good. And you can, I'm getting pictures. I used to shoot a Canon 1DX2 digital SLR. I spent 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, a decade trying to get certain images. I got the A9 II Sony. That was the first one. That autofocus system's unbelievable. Now the R5 with this eye detect, with tracking, I got those images in 5 minutes when I had the opportunity. That's how much better this technology is. And if you help it out, it's like voodoo. I mean, this stuff is just crazy. Finding the subject in the viewfinder. 840 millimeters, 1200 millimeters, even 500 millimeters. That's a cool thing about zooms now, right? You can be at 100 millimeters, find the bird, and then zoom in on it. I kind of think of that as a crutch. It's kind of a crutchy thing, because most people can't stay on a bird when they're just trying to stay on a bird, let alone be zooming at the same time. Multitasking. How many of you think human beings are great at multitasking? I'm a scientist, okay? I read a lot of papers, a lot of peer-reviewed papers. There's been a lot of study done on multitasking in humans. Some people say, I'm great at multitasking. No, you aren't. You suck. You suck. Okay? Every study that's been done, when you give people multiple things to do, none of the things that they're doing are done to the level that they could do it if it was the only thing they're doing, right? So multitasking, zooming and trying to stay on a bird that's flying around is really hard, okay? What about finding I can't give you a trick there. I can give you a tip. Practice. It's all about practice. The only way to get good at finding a bird in the viewfinder when it's bopping around in a bush or flying around is to practice at those high focal lengths, okay? Because your field of view is really small. But there's no shortcut here. Some people are just naturally really good at it. I've had some people that have come to me and I've helped them out, and they're just getting started in birds. And it's like, how long have you been doing it? I just started. 10 years? You know what I mean? Because they're really good, right? But practice. I'm practicing all the time. Don't practice when you've spent $20,000 to go to Africa to shoot these birds, you know. That's not the time to be practicing, okay? And getting frustrated and learning a new camera system. How many of you have brought a brand new camera system and then went on a really expensive tour someplace, right? Not a good idea. There's birds flying around everywhere. Go find some pigeons someplace on your lunch hour and don't even take pictures. Just practice finding them in the viewfinder, okay? Find the bird, find the bird, find the bird, find the bird, find the bird. Find the bird, get focused. 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 Take the pictures. Find the bird focus, take the pictures, you know. That's the progression, but you just have to do it a lot. Everybody says, man, you are so fast at acquiring these birds. How can you do that? Because I've been doing it every day for 30 years. Okay, just about. So it's like you drive your car every day. When you get down to the stop sign at the end of the street, you're not looking where the brake pedal is. Are you? You know where it is. You've been doing this for your whole life. You just do it. That's the way you have to get with your camera equipment. You can't be thinking about how to change the shutter speed or something like that, right? Practice. Tree swallow, in flight, that's a midge that is eating in midair, okay? So that's the kind of stuff that you can get if you practice and if you take advantage of this technology. This is a shot, I'd go out and shoot 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 images. With my 1DX2, I might get 2 that I like, right? I went out this spring when the tree swallows were migrating through. There's tens of thousands of them on a certain lake, eating these midges, fattening up on their migration. I went out there for one morning. I shot 4,000 images. I kept 600 of them. That's the difference in technology. That's not my skill changing, that's technology allowing this. And why? This is all about timing and probability to get the bird with the midge right there. People say you don't need 20 frames per second. If you can't get what you want with 10 frames per second or 5 frames per second, then you're not going to get it. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. This is probability. The difference between the bird here and the midge here out of the frame and the bird here and the midge here right in its beak is less than 1 second. If you're shooting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames per second, your probability of getting that is really low. Shooting 20 or 30 frames per second, your probability goes up by over 10 times. Okay? That's why I came home with so many images. It's not about getting the bird sharp, it's about the timing that you just can't do with your eye. You don't even see this happening. You get home and you look at your images and you see that you caught it. You didn't actually see it. It's just so fast. So we already talked about acquiring and holding focus. No, that's okay. You can go through this. I'm not going to play the video. Aim small. How many of you saw the movie The Patriot?
Oh, yeah.
Long time ago, right? There was a scene in there that I was going to play, but it would take too long. So there's a scene in there, though, where the dad, right, Mel Gibson, is trying to get one of his sons back from the Redcoats. They had taken him because he was some kind of traitor or whatever to them. And his 2 younger sons are with him. And he asked them if they remember what he taught them about shooting. In this case, it's muskets, right? Well, he told them to aim small, miss small. This is another tip. It's kind of like picking a bird out of a flock, right? When I'm trying to shoot a bird, take a picture of a bird, whether it's in flight or on a stick or bopping around in a bush, I'm not looking at the entire bird. I'm not trying to get focused on the entire bird. I'm looking at a much smaller. Go ahead. One more. That's not what I'm looking at. Okay, next one. Next one. I'm looking at that. My attention goes right to the bird's head, and if I can see it, if it's a big enough bird like this barred owl, to its eye, right? And that's where I'm trying. And if your eye is focused on that, and you hit that autofocus button, I don't care what method you're using, guess where the autofocus is probably going to grab? Because it's going to grab there because it's in the center of the frame, okay? Yeah. Because that's what you're focusing on. So aim small, miss small. Think small target, smaller than it even is when you got a swallow, which is small. That's this reaction. This has nothing to do with that. This has to do with bigger birds. But anyway, but even the small birds, try to look at the smallest part of the bird you can actually look at and keep track of, because it'll help you. Full-time manual focus lenses. So this 600 f4, make this so you can see it. Okay. So
We can
this
probably
600 f4 is a lens that has, even when you're on autofocus, the manual focus ring, which is this big huge thing right here, it's hard to see.
Ron, you can put the mic down. I think we can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be really awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It still works. So when you're on autofocus and you're panning and I'm holding this big thing up, my hand happens to fall right here on the manual focus ring. And I'm panning, and just the littlest movement of that ring is counteracting what the autofocus is doing. You gotta be careful about that. That's a tip I'm gonna give you. You see this gaffer's tape? So that ring won't move. All right, I'm shooting birds in flight. I'm not manual focusing. Okay, so that's out of the picture. More and more now with these cameras and the newer lenses, you have a choice to make it active when you're shooting autofocus or to turn that off. That's coming along, but a lot of you still have, like me, older lenses that even on the newer bodies are gonna have this be basically always active. Be aware of that. I've had clients shooting all morning and I'm looking, what? It said it was on the bird and it's not sharp and all that, and I'm watching it, so I'll watch it. And as we're panning, they're moving the focus ring. Well, you're just unfocusing with the autofocus, it's not their fault, it's just a bad design. That's why now they're making it to where you can turn it on and off. So just be aware of that. If you're having a frustrating day, maybe that's what's happening, not getting sharp shots. Next. Yeah. Go on. I'm trying to go. Back, how many of you shoot back button autofocus? How many of you shoot half press autofocus? Okay. There's no right or wrong way with all of this stuff. Okay, I'm just giving tips and tricks here and stuff like that. I mean, you have to take the bits and pieces that are going to fit your style of shooting birds, wildlife, whatever, any other type of photography. But I'll tell you one of the great things that's happening now, and I'm going to use the Canon R5 as an example because it's the only camera that I know of that can do this. Okay, not Sony A1 can do this. Okay, I shoot back button, and this is one of the reasons why. Each one of these buttons, there's an autofocus on button, there's an asterisk button, which is actually the AE lock button, and then the autofocus point selection button on the end. You can program each one of those buttons to do a separate autofocus method. So now when I'm shooting birds, I can hit this button for one type of autofocus. If that's not working, I can go right here and I can go right here for a third. In a split second, I have 3 autofocus methods at my thumb tip. With a single half press of a shutter button, you can't, that's one thing. Half press, that's it. For birds, this can be critical. It can be absolutely critical. I've got the autofocus on button set to eye detect with tracking. I've got the AE lock button set to whatever my main method is, and I use the ring, the control ring on here to set my method. I generally have it set to zone, a small zone in the center of the frame. I have the last button, and this is the critical one, set to spot autofocus, the tiniest autofocus point right in the center of the frame that you can get. Because you're shooting that bird in flight, and I'm using eye detect with tracking, and it's doing fine, but it lands amongst, like that snail kite coming down, all that grass on the same focal plane, behind and in front. Do you think that autofocus system is going to grab the bird, or is it going to want to grab the grass? Vertical structure, autofocus systems still love it. It's going to grab the grass. I instantly go to spot. Now it's my job to stay on that bird as it's in the grass, picking up the snail and flying off. But if I didn't have spot instantly available, there's no time to be doing this to get the spot autofocus, right? Back button autofocus on these cameras now. The Sony A1 and the Sony A9 II and the other cameras, generally you can program at least 2 different kinds of autofocus. The R5, you can do 3. And that is really, that's just
The
amazing.
R6 you can too.
Yes, the R6 you can.
Because I did it.
So when I'm talking about the Canon R5, those of you who have the Canon R6 do the same camera, except just lesser resolution, smaller megapixels in the R6. Let's try the next one. Tracking, okay, so there's settings. The only thing I really want to talk about here is that there's settings in these cameras that affect the autofocus behavior. Tracking sensitivity or tracking priority is one of them, okay? And so things like when you get locked on a bird and you don't want things that get in the way as you're flying, panning with a flying bird, it flies behind a tree real quick. Well, as the autofocus passes that, you don't want it to grab the tree. It can do it. I mean, this stuff is refreshing at blinding speeds in there. You want it to stay on the bird. So you turn tracking sensitivity all the way down in your menu system. So that way, When you're on the bird, anything else gets in the way, like that grass, sometimes it will still hold the bird if it can see the eye, especially now. At least you maximize potential for that autofocus system to stay on your target once you've acquired it. Damn it, I've worked hard to get on that bird. I don't want this autofocus system to think all of a sudden the stupid tree is what I want to focus on. There are settings for this. Again, work with your camera and its abilities. Now, in the past, these changing of these settings, like tracking sensitivity or tracking priority is one of them, you know, when they first started bringing this stuff, it didn't make much difference. I mean, you could go from one extreme to the other on the settings and you might notice maybe something. Not anymore. These things change stuff now. Okay, so pay attention to your settings. If you're doing something different, not just this bird flight stuff, that's easy stuff, and all of a sudden there's some other kind of photography you're doing, and you've got it set up for birds in flight with tracking sensitivity all the way to the negative, and you try to do something else that really demands a really reactive autofocus, and you don't change it, well, again, you're not working with the system, you're bucking it, and it's going to hurt you, because these things, these changes, these settings really matter now. Image stabilization is another one on these cameras. Image stabilization, IBIS and body stabilization, vibration reduction, steady shot, whatever they call it, whatever the manufacturer calls it, it's all the same thing pretty much. It matters. Try to pan with a flying bird having the mode 1 set on IS and IBIS on the R5. Good luck. Because mode 1 is for static subjects, and it's going to try to stabilize all your movement in all axes, okay? So you try to pan with it, well, the camera's just going, you know, trying to stop you from panning. First of all, you can hardly stay on the bird, and the second of all, you're going to look at your images and it's going to be like, you know, blurs and stuff like that. Okay, so work with your system. Autofocus points. This used to be something that was really important, right? How many autofocus points does my camera have? This has become kind of a nebulous thing now. Like with iDetect with track, there's thousands of autofocus points on the R5, on the R6, on the A1, on the Olympus systems. They're amazing autofocus systems, and there's just thousands of, I guess you could still call them points. But the autofocus point thing really doesn't matter anymore, except when it comes to that spot thing that I was talking about. I always have that one, it's kind of the fallback from before. When I shot the 1D4 and stuff like that, the only thing I shot was one center autofocus point. It was the quickest and most accurate that there was on the camera. I still kind of have that fallback for when things just aren't working right. Okay, so don't get, the tip I'm giving you here is don't get sucked into the technology to where you start losing track of your abilities. Okay, you have the ability to, you still have to be able to track these birds. You've got to develop that. If you don't have it, you're still a photographer. Okay, all this technology tends to suck creativity out of you and technique and everything else, and all this stuff becomes a crutch. I told you about zooming being a crutch. Well, this autofocus point stuff can become a crutch. I'm just going to get the bird in there, I'm going to hit iDetect for tracking, and if it grabs it, it doesn't, well, fine, that's the way you want to do it, but that one center autofocus point can still do it for you, you know, even after all these advances, artificial intelligence, deep learning, all that kind of stuff. Autofocus method, that was kind of the same thing, so yeah, keep going. Frames per second, we already talked about that. RAW versus CRAW versus JPEG. I want to cover this really quickly. How many of you shoot RAW? How many of you shoot JPEGs on the field? Sometimes.
Depends on the camera.
Right, depends on the camera. It depends on if you got to get something off to someone right away. You don't have time to post-process or something like that. But generally, for birds in flight, wildlife photography, we're shooting quote-unquote RAW. Well, now there's stuff called CRAW, compressed RAW. Sony has it, Canon has it, Nikon has it. It's RAW, but the file sizes are small. Okay, the tip I want to give here is the fact that, at least with the Canon R5, the one I've had the most experience is RAW versus CRAW, or compressed RAW, is that they're just, I mean, you don't lose any data that matters to the quality of the image when you shoot a compressed RAW. That's the same thing with Sony. I shot Sony's, I mean, I never shot full RAW in my Sony cameras. Again, with the R5, the Canon R6. Compressed RAW, from what I understand with Canon anyway, is it saves the file size, it reduces it by manipulating the color data, okay? It has nothing to do, so many people think when you go from RAW to CRAW, you no longer have 45 megapixels. The resolution has changed. The resolution has not changed. It's just the amount of data and the size of the file. It goes from 45 megabytes per file, per image, down to about 27. It's great. Why? Because you can get more images on a card, you can shoot longer bursts before your buffer fills up, you can download your images when you get home quicker because the files are smaller. That's the only thing it does. It does not take your image from 45 megapixels to say 17 or 27 or something like that. That's cropping, that's crop mode. It's a different deal, okay? Shoot compressed RAW if you've got the ability in your camera versus full RAW, give it a try, okay? Look at the images, see if it really matters to you or not. To 99% of the people, it's not gonna matter, all right? So, and it can really enhance that burst, right? You fill your buffer with a bunch of action of a bird doing great things, and you go from 20 frames per second to 1. Well, I don't want that to happen. It's gonna happen, but I want it to stay at 20 frames per second as long as I possibly can get it. This change right here will help you do that, all right? Okay, I mentioned earlier I was gonna talk about manual versus priority, like aperture or shutter priority. Now there's also FV, so there's AV, right, TV, M, and now there's FV, which stands for flexible as far as I'm concerned. I'm not gonna go there right now. Why do I shoot manual? Fully manual. That includes no auto ISO, okay? Everything is controlled by me. Shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Because as that bird is flying by, blue sky, dark background, water, all different luminosities. Right? As that bird goes 1 second, it's in the bright sky, next second it's against a dark background, next second it's on the water, which is kind of in between. If you're set on any priority mode, what is the camera's meter doing? It's changing your exposure based on some metering parameter that you set, whether it's evaluative or spot. You're not using spot metering on birds in flight. Ain't gonna work. Go for it. It ain't gonna work. Try to keep that spot on there. Ain't happening. Okay, so the problem with that is that if you're shooting a priority mode, well, I dial in exposure compensation. Oh, so as the split second's happening, you're dialing in exposure compensation to keep the bird composed or exposed correctly? Man, you're good. Because I ain't doing that. You know, you set your exposure for the bird in the light that you want it in, like I said earlier. And when you're on manual, the meter isn't doing anything. It's there, it's showing differences in luminosity, brightness, but it's not affecting any of your parameters. It's not affecting your exposure. So I don't care what the overall luminosity of the scene is, as long as the bird is basically in the same light as it goes by, even though the overall frame is much darker down here than it is up here, the bird's gonna be exposed correctly every single shot. If you're an aperture priority, that shutter speed is changing. Up here it's 1/5000th of a second, down here it's 1/1000th of a second. That sucks, okay, because you want high shutter speeds to stop the bird. But not only that, your exposure is completely changed to be much brighter, but the bird's still illuminated just as what it was up here. So now you blew out your bird. The background looks great, but the bird's completely blown out. Manual exposure for birds in flight. It's really, really a good thing. Auto ISO or not, auto ISO is using the meter, is changing your ISO when you're in auto ISO, so it's changing your exposure. When is aperture priority or shutter priority or anything a good idea? If you've got a bird, like a warbler, in a bush, and the overall luminosity of the scene isn't changing as the bird moves around, but let's say it's partly cloudy, and so it's bright, dark every 30 seconds. Well, that's not good when you're in manual. It's like, man, I'm gonna wear out my wheel here, you know. that's a great time to shoot a priority mode, right? Because your bird is also, the exposure on your bird in that light, as it's cloudy, bright, is changing along with the background. You will keep consistent exposures if you shoot aperture priority or shutter priority or whatever in those kinds of situations. But when your bird stays in a constant exposure, a constant brightness, the bird is, but the overall luminosity of the scene is changing instantly as it goes along, not the time to be in a priority mode. Manual. Okay, we're going to talk about a little bit about when you get out in the field. I do most of my stuff not sitting in a car. Okay, you know, you really need, if you want the best opportunities, get out there, learn about your subjects. Some people say that I have an advantage a lot of people don't have, because I've studied birds for 40 years. Yeah, kind of true, but that doesn't mean you can't say, learn their behaviors, get out. This is walk, don't ride. I mean, that's literally true. But what I'm really trying to get at is get out with your animals that you're trying to photograph. Learn about them, learn their behaviors, and you will get those storytelling shots a lot more often. Wait and see. How many of you have seen this? There's a pole, and there's a peregrine falcon sitting on the top of that pole. Oh, flew off. To the next pole. To the next pole, right? Well, you're chasing this bird down these telephone poles. What kind of shots are you getting? Butt shots, right? Butt shots. Wait and see. If you wait, you're going to see it. It's going to come to you. If you can get into a scenario where you're part of the environment, look at all this stuff. Do you see anything that's bright pink up here or anything? I get people that come out of my, if you saw a picture of my boat, completely camouflaged. I didn't go through all that effort for no reason. And it's not, this is, you know, everything's camouflaged for a reason. Become part of the environment. Can the birds still see us? Do they know? Absolutely. I'm not trying to tell anybody that these animals can't see us, but you're much less obtrusive to them. They'll get used to you being there much quicker. If you're sitting in the grass and you're all camoed up and you're sitting there quietly, things come back out. And they come close, and they do what they naturally do, and that's when you get the storytelling type images. If you're going to chase them,
Butt shots.
it's not good. Camouflage, blinds, right? That's what we're talking about here. Calls. This is a touchy subject. Okay, some people hate it when you play a call to get a bird to come close to you. Okay, but and I do sometimes do that, not in the sense of I call it and I keep calling it and calling it, so it's come, but I want to know what's there, right? You're in an area, you kind of know what should be around, but you play a call, you think, wow, there should be a lazuli bunting around here, male somewhere, right? Well, you play the call and they call back, pretty much, well now at least I know I'm not going to waste my time in that spot. We'll set up, like I said, in camo and all that. You know kind of what perches they like, and you sit there and you wait, and hopefully he'll sing, and you'll get to then watch, and within 5 minutes, if he's there, you're going to figure out in 5 minutes what his favorite singing perches are. You may not get the shot that morning, but you come back there early the next day, before it gets light out, now you know he loves to sing from that branch right there. You get there in camouflage, before it gets light, you sit there and the light comes up, and whoop, right there. Got it. Right? Not only did you get the shot of him on the branch singing, but you got him flying in, flying off, bringing back bugs, all that kind of stuff. Calls can be useful, just don't abuse them. Decoys, live decoys or not. When I shoot ducks out in the Indian River Lagoon, Scaup, I put out decoys like duck hunters do. I ain't shooting the gun, I'm shooting with a camera. Sometimes decoys are really important. Okay, because it's the only way, you got a huge area and you don't know that singing stick with ducks. Decoys can work, right? And they work very well. Shooting vests. How many of you have a shooting vest? Camera vest, photography vest. Does it look like mine?
Yeah.
How much did you pay for yours? No, you don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell me. I paid $19 for this. Okay, this is a turkey hunting vest. camouflage. Try to find an actual photo photographer's vest in camo, okay? I don't have it on right now, but it actually has a built-in seat, waterproof seat that comes down, padded. So wet grass, you can sit down, all right? It has all the pockets you could ever want for all your teleconverters and all that kind of stuff, right?
Amazon.
Cheap alternatives. Lens coats. This is an actual lens coat made by the company Lens Coat or whatever it is. This is the neoprene stuff, right? Protects your $13,000 lens pretty well. This is not. This is stuff called Mossy Oaks Graphics, and it comes in a sheet material like this. And you apply it, it's sticky. But the cool thing about this stuff is that you can keep it on there for years, just heat it up a little bit with the hairdryer and pull it off, no residue whatsoever, never fades. It's amazing stuff, a lot cheaper actually. The amount of material on this probably costs $5. That, $100 and some. So there's alternatives, that's what I'm getting at here. Next. Fogging up lenses, how many of you have that issue? A lot, especially here in Florida, right? God, the humidity. There is a material, I didn't bring out the bottle. Write this down, if I can remember what it's called now. Don't write it down, because I can't remember the exact pronunciation, but there's a lens cleaning spray that you can buy that also really cuts down on fogging problems. I mean, amazingly
For glasses.
well. And I'll get the bottle out and show you. Cold hands and equipment. Even in Florida in the wintertime, it can get cold here. Everybody knows about the chemical hand warmers, right? You know what that is? It's a hand warmer, electronic hand warmer. You charge it up, USB-C, turn it on, little red light starts to glow, there's 3 settings, it's already getting warm, that quick. It'll last 7 to 8 hours on the first setting, and the first setting is all you need, believe me. You could light a fire with this thing if you put it on 3.
Can you make cocoa?
No, I can't do that. The other cool thing about this is that it doubles as a power supply. You can charge your cell phone with this. All right? $19.99 on Amazon.
How much?
$19.99.
What's the brand?
You know, there's so many of them. And they're all these weird names, they're all made in China or whatever. Right. Bugs. How many of you use bug spray? Right? A lot of that stuff is no good for camera equipment. Melts plastics and rubbers and stuff like that. This gets rid of bugs. Anybody know what it is?
Ultrasonic.
Thermacell. Butane cartridge inside. Chemical patch. You turn it on, it warms up that patch, puts out the chemical, keeps mosquitoes away from a radius that's pretty darn big, unless it's really windy or something like that. But in blinds and stuff like that, this thing is awesome. It's not going to hurt your camera equipment, right? Stuff like that. They come, you can get the little pouches so that you can clip them on your belt or whatever. Really cool. What else we got here? Fast practice. We already talked about practice, right? You're trying to do birds in flight. You're trying to get better at birds in flight. Don't practice on great blue herons. Practice on things like ducks, swallows, fast things. You may not get good images, but then when that slower bird comes by, it's like, oh, this is easy, right? Exactly. Practice makes perfect. We already talked about that. Practice, practice. You know, how many of you have kept every image you've ever taken? I'm going to tell you a little story, and then we're about done here. So I know I'm long-winded, but when I do tours, multi-day tours, like in Spain and things like that, we generally take a couple evenings during the 11 days, whatever, and we have bring us some of your nice images, and we'll show them and we'll talk about it. Right? It's not a critique, but it's just a sharing thing. So I asked clients to do that. And one woman decided, okay, fine, and we're going to do that. She comes walking up to me and she hands me this Ziploc bag. And it's completely stuffed with media cards. And I go, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? I said, well, those are my images. I said, from here? She said, no, those are my images. She uses her media cards as her long-term store. She never takes them, she just buys new media cards. She had, I don't know how many were in that, but it was a big Ziploc, right? Okay. Not every image you take is great. Sorry to tell you that, and I know you all know this, but I've got people that never have thrown an image away. It's like, wow. And they complain then about about having to go through all their images, post-processing and all that kind of stuff. But that's part of digital photography, right? And it's a learning. Use it. The tip I'm trying to get across here is the more images you actually look at, not just of your own, but of other people's, like at those little sessions we have on tours and stuff like that, the better you get. You just get to understand yourself better as a photographer by looking at your own images and other people's and become your own worst critic. It's the best thing you can do for your photography. The minute I let go of the fact that not all of my images were great many, many, many years ago, you just take off as a photographer, okay? Because you gotta understand that, you gotta really be honest with yourself and what you're doing and in your art, whatever art you do, and you'll get better quicker. Backgrounds. I've seen so many great bird pictures. The bird looks awesome. Backgrounds suck, okay? And I think in subject photography, especially wildlife photography, the subject's important, but the background is, the overall look of the image, right? It's either gonna make the image and bring it up here, or it can destroy it. So the only point I wanna make here, tip I wanna make here is pay attention to your backgrounds. You got a great bird and it's doing great things, and you're standing here and you're just so trained on the bird that, then you get home and you look at the image and you're so disappointed because right behind the bird was this bright stick sticking right out of its head, which is now blurry because it's out of the plane of focus, but it's like, that's all I look at now. I look at the bird, I just look at the stick. It's like, ugh, all you had to do was do that, and now it's an award-winning image. Backgrounds. Overall, be aware of the entire surroundings that you're shooting your subject in. I don't care what kind of photography it is. If it's a subject type photography, portraiture, you have, is there a reason why they put up those nice backgrounds and then that's an ugly brick behind it, right? Out in nature it's much harder, but pay attention. They can take an image from being down here to being way up here. Patience. Some people, this isn't a zoo. We're not out in a zoo. Even zoos, you have to have patience. They don't come out of that little square hole in the concrete all the time, right? You still got to be patient. But in nature, a lot of times, I get a lot of clients. It's like if the bird isn't out there, like 5 minutes after we get there, flying around in front of them, it's like, well. Patience. It'll happen, right? Got to have patience. Go to the next one. Okay, so these two go together. I kind of have an aggressive nature when I photograph. Being passive and everything is fine for certain types of photography, but for me, in order for me to really do well, panning accurately, concentrating on everything I need to concentrate on, I don't play Barry Manilow when I'm going to shoot in the morning and it's so dark 30, I play something like, 80s rock or something. Get your blood moving, get you in a more of a alert, aggressive nature. I tend to do better that way. That's this concentration versus conversation. How many of you go with people, other people, your friends, right? It's a time to do something with other people that have a like interest. They're your friends. Is that when you get your best images?
No, it's not the time to talk.
Yeah, I'm out with other people sometimes, and great stuff is going on, and they're over here talking. I'm shooting. Yeah, you will miss a lot. Make up your mind. Is this trip to be with your friends, okay, and converse and have fun and all that? Maybe get some good shots. You'll pull off a few probably. Or are you out to really get the best images you can get? I'm not saying this shouldn't be a cooperative thing. I go out with people all the time. But he's over there, or she, in camo, and I'm over here in camo. We're not, hey, how's it going over there? We're quiet, and then when you're done, moving on to the next spot, talk and all that kind of stuff. Concentration versus conversation. Again, multitasking, you can't really do both really well. Chimping. Oh, wow, what did I get? What did I get? What did I get? Oh, damn it! You know, everything, you know. This happens all the time. And then, you know, you just took a burst of however many images, and you're looking at them. Well, the bird just turned around and came back, and, you know, and you're doing this. You know, I watch my clients all the time, and they have to look at every single image the minute they have a chance. It seems what you've got isn't going anywhere. Okay, it's on the card. Hopefully, you look at it when you get home. Check your exposure, check to make sure things are working okay every once in a while.
Right.
That's fine, but to look at every image, after every burst, not the best. You're gonna miss some opportunities that way. So don't chimp any more than you really have to. I mean, unless that's the reason you go out there. I've got people that have to post to Instagram like then, you know, like then. Well, and if you say, well, here comes another kite's coming, I'm putting. Well, if that's what makes it fun for you, super. That really makes me nervous. You know, it's like, okay, whatever. Digital realm now, not film. 24 frames, 36 frames. Only 5 more, probably 5 more left. You know, I got to be careful. These cards, I've got 2 cards in this camera. One's a 256 gigabyte card, the other's a 128 gigabyte card. 10,000 images can fit on there. If it's happening, I'm shooting. I'm not worried about, well, then I got to look at all these images when I get home. Yeah, that's kind of the point, right? I want to go home with 10,000 images, not one. It tells you, you know, take the shot. Take the shot. Even if you don't think it's going to work out quite. It's off axis to the light. It's like, oh, okay. You get home, that might be the shot. The light was hit just right, something happened, and you got it, right? If you don't shoot, you don't got it. You don't have the image on your card, you don't have it, all right? Take the shot. It's digital age now. How many of you know the name Vince Lombardi? Probably everybody, right? I grew up in Wisconsin. My dad was a huge Packers fan. I became a huge Packers fan. Vince Lombardi, famous Green Bay coach. Well, he had a lot of quotes that are attributed to him that people say still to this day. I'm not going to quote him verbatim, but he did say one time to his team that if you want to be the best football player, it's the only thing in your life. It has to be the only thing. You can't do anything else. You can't think about anything else. You eat, sleep, drink, football. If you want to be the best photographer you can be in any genre, specializing isn't a bad way to go. You will get good really fast. If you try to do portraiture and landscapes and birds and whatever else, can you get good at them? Sure. Probably take you a lot longer to get really good at any one of them or all of them. If that's what's fun for you, variety, great. For me, I decided a long time ago that birds were my passion. Birds are different because they can fly. So my deal, my specialization, birds in flight. And that's basically what I do 95% of the time. If a moose walks out when we're in Montana, do I say, well, that's not a bird? We move on? No, we should take pictures of the moose, you know. But if you're really into getting better at what you're doing in photography at the moment, specialize in it for a while. Just do that for a while. You'll really gain ground quickly. Okay? If you try to do everything, like I said, multitasking again, kind of all comes around, right? It will take you longer to get good at any one of them, if not all of them. So practice, more practice. That's the conclusion, and that's me.